Welcome to the Department of No Live. This is a new kind of web app and API security series. That's actually a series of candid, real talk conversations that will explore how modern security looks through a fluff-free lens featuring some brilliant guest speakers. So I'm Kelly Shortridge. I'm one of the co-hosts. I'm a senior principal product technologist at Fastly.
I'm B. Hughes. I'm a staff security engineer at PagerDuty.
And we are super excited for the first installment of this series featuring Rinki, here to join us in a delectable discourse on how modern security looks and how it is successful. So Rinki, if you want to introduce yourself briefly.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for having me here. I'm Rinki Sethi. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at Twitter. I've been in cybersecurity for the last 2 decades at companies like Intuit, eBay, Palo Alto Networks, and the list goes on. Been around the block in different companies leading cybersecurity in different industries. So excited to be here and excited for the chat.
Yeah, and I hope everyone in the audience is as excited as we are, and put all your very excited comments and hot takes, whatever else you have, in the chat section, which should be in your bottom right. And if you have any questions for us along the way, you can put them in the Q&A box, which should be below our lovely faces in the video. So with that, let's dive in. A good place to start is with priorities. I think no matter where you look, if you don't set clear goals and people don't understand what the overall mission is, things often fall apart. So what's your kind of view on, like, first, what are the most important priorities in modern security, and how do you make sure everyone across the organization is on the same page about them?
Yeah, modern security, it's an interesting take, right? Because when I talk to most CISOs out there, we're still focused on some of the basic security problems that we've been looking at for a long time, the unsexy problems like identity and access management. How do you build security into the software development lifecycle? But the big change that's come across, I think, when you think about modern security, is we're no longer acting as the police and the naysayers. Security is really, truly a partner for the business. I mean, when you look across companies now, you see more security practitioners sitting on boards. Boards are talking about security as maybe even their number one risk to the business. And so how security is thought of for a company has changed dramatically. And I think modern security involves making sure that you're partnering with executive business leaders across the company to make sure they can speak to all the security priorities, and really ensuring that they're not just sponsoring the projects or the programs, but actually champions of the programs and the projects that you're leading. So if you're talking about identity and access management, any executive in the company, all the way up to the CEO, should be able to talk about it and be a champion of it in the same exact way. And I think that's where the notion of modern security and how partnering is happening is so different. And I would say the other piece is really thinking about how security is built in from the very, very beginning is a really important component of modern security as well. And, although we've been talking about that for at least a decade now, I think now more than ever that because security is such a hot topic, companies are actually building it at the very, very beginning, knowing that that will become a competitive advantage for them.
One thing I'd love to kind of dig in, and when you say executives championing it, how do you make sure that's not just lip service? Like, are there ways that you measure this? Like, how do you make sure that, everything is understood even at the executive level in a practical way?
I think, yeah, there's some interesting ways to measure it or actually see it even. I remember being part of a couple companies where they did, like we all talk about security awareness videos, right? And usually there's these check the box compliance videos that everybody takes, which I don't even consider part of security awareness really. But we used to build security videos where the executives, there would be these funny, quirky little security awareness videos where an executive was doing something they shouldn't do from a security perspective. And the security team would be like, I don't think you should do that. And they would be funny, campy. And our executives, the CEO, the CFO, they'd all come in and they'd act in those videos. And they played those at the company-wide all hands. And literally the teams would be sitting there at the end, like waiting until they show the video. It's like the all hands isn't done until they see that. And so you see that as a part of the culture. You see the executives playing a key role in part of the messaging. So that's like the intangibles, it's what you see and how you feel about it. And then the more tangible part of it, I think, is I'm always on the pursuit of getting to this point, but there was at least one company where we got this right, where the executives were calling for, hey, we want to review security risk at least once during my staff meetings. And we would go and make sure that there was a dashboard, and they own and they drove it, that reduction of risk in their departments, with security being a partner. And I think that's championship right there.
Risk is a incredible topic, as it is quite hard to measure. Humans are traditionally not amazing at it. It's very unknown. You don't like, oh, the risk today is 7, despite what some security vendors will try and sell you. How do you go about getting, I guess, data and metrics for risk to kind of show things? Like, these attacks didn't work is useful, but that doesn't tell you the likelihood of them working were those things not there.
I think it's really external. I think that there's so many examples of attacks that have happened, and I think you can leverage those, like things that have happened that have created risks for other companies and breaches that have happened as a result of, most of the time, some kind of human error, whether that's bad development practices, whether it's social engineering. And I think bringing those and making them relevant to the person that you're talking to, for a finance team, that might be different than for a developer. And then being able to say, these are our priorities. These are the highest risks for the company. Here's why. Here's how it ties to something that's happened in the industry. And these are the metrics that we're tracking. And here's what that specifically means for your role and what you might be doing. And if you don't believe me, let me show you that how work that you're doing, if not done safely, ties back to a risk that exists in the company and what that could mean. And this is why it's important. And I think championing that and making it really relevant is super important. And it's not a one size fits all. I remember when we talked to finance teams, very different things. We're worried about, gift card fraud maybe, or wire transfer fraud and things like that. You're talking to recruiters, they get phished through LinkedIn and other things. And then you're talking to developers and it's totally different, right? They're like, oh, I don't even read my email, so that's not going to work on me. So then you're talking a different language.
I think we've talked a lot about kind of the strategy side of how success looks. I'm very curious. I think a lot of, let's say, traditional sort of CISOs will say, we're too busy firefighting. We can't pursue this kind of innovative business and figure out how to be an enabler, let alone figure out how security can be, differentiator and do all this UX, right? We're just fighting fires. So how do you kind of get there in a sense? How would you say you should go from, let's say you're, back in the waterfalls and monoliths and, Department of No, to continue with the theme of this event. How do you move from there to what you're talking about in a kind of tactical sense?
Yeah. So I could talk about a couple roles now where I've been in, where the security team had a brand, right? That it was, if you partner with them, they're going to slow you down, and they're going to say no, that you can't do this, or they'll say yes and they'll throw a grenade and then walk away, because they'll give you this 1,000 things that you need to go and do that they don't even know how to solve for, right? There'll be all these requirements that they don't have a proposed solution for. And it would frustrate partners to a point where then you're actually losing the battle, right? Because they were just like, we're going to bypass, we're just going to go and we'll deal with it. And I think there's been a couple of things. One, you do have to change the culture of your organization, the security team, sometimes, if that's where they're at. And you have to understand why has it become like that? And a lot of times they feel like that's, if you partner too much, and there is a fine line here where you can partner too much, where you're also losing the battle there, but it's a fine line. And it's, if they feel like if they don't put a hard no, that the company's going to take some risk, right? And I think one of the things is you start with the security organization to say, no, we're not putting the risk on our shoulders. There's going to be an executive decision made. We do need to point out, here are the key risks. You also need to understand, what does the business need to accomplish? So it's starting to change that mindset for the security team itself. And a lot of times that's challenging, especially when they're feeling burnt out. And so there's a culture change that needs to happen. I think a CISO needs to come in, evaluate the team, make sure you also have the skills. Do they have the partnering skills, or is it the skill not there? And maybe we need to rethink. If the skill is there and they're just burnt out, let's fix some of those issues so they have a better mindset. And if there are we just don't have the right models and the right check-ins and gates put in place. Let's do that. So I guess to kind of frame this in a more clean way, it's culture of the security organization. I think it starts there. Getting executive buy-in, I think that's really important, that they understand the strategy, they're in agreement and alignment, and they can champion that strategy. And then I think it's inserting the right checkpoints, gates in different processes that you need to put in place to be able to kind of, have an agreement with other business partners across the company to say that here's how we're going to make sure we're holding each other accountable to the right checks, and that we're not overdoing it or underdoing it in any moment. And I think then you move from a no to maybe a yes, but, and then more to a partnership where there's shared accountability and both people are thinking about risk at the same time.
How do you measure that kind of, it sounds like trade-off you said there, like how do you make sure that, you're not on that fine line, you're not erring too side on the far of like partnership and just allowing them, YOLO and yeet all over the place. Whereas otherwise you're shutting everything down, right? Like how do you measure that or report that out?
Yeah, I think regular check-ins are like, there's a couple things, right? One is if you do insert the right gates and then people are following the process, that in itself is a tell, right? Versus people bypassing things. Bypassing is a great metric too, because it's like something's not working. Some people may not be telling you, but it's not working if you have this all the teams bypassing a process you put in place. So that's one where it's like kind of silent feedback. And then I think if you are following them, maybe there's something actually really good there. And so I think that's in itself feedback. I actually go and talk to my partners on what's going well, where are the complaints happening, like not trying to call anybody out, but where could we be better, right? And I also give them feedback on where I feel they could be better or where things are going great. If they're a role model team, I'll let them know that, right? And there's and I think that feedback just loop is really, really important. And then I think it's important to build like expectations, and that happens through metrics and having a dashboard that you agree on to say, here's how we measure risk and here's how we measure security. And are you on board with that? And if we both agree on that, then let's build the right capabilities to make sure we can get to that. And that usually is a negotiation back and forth. And that's not to say it's ever going to be perfect, because there are going to be times where one or the other is going to push it harder. And I think it's healthy to have those kind of dialogues.
I've never heard of a security org reporting how many projects they've blocked as like a KPI. And like, yep, we stopped these many projects from happening. Because that isn't how they see that interaction. They see that as we stopped these unsafe things from going into production, but that is perhaps, very much so from engineering, you stopped our project, and the business has to say, you stopped those projects, not you made something more secure, but they have to understand the risk more there. So that seems as well as having a, someone who can champion securities as a whole, you need people who understand that to work out where that middle ground is.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think one interesting thing that we don't talk about enough is a security incident, right? So when a security incident happens, why did it happen? And if you can tie that back to something that could have been prevented had you taken the right steps, I think companies need to be more, not in all security incidents, but I think companies need to be more transparent and spend time on that postmortem to say, here is what happened in the security incident. Had we done a threat model to begin with, we would have prevented it. We spent 45 hours or 60 hours on this incident, or maybe even more when you think about the number of people and teams that would need to get involved in a large incident. And you say, we could have spent 3 hours in the beginning had we done these things. And I think making that point really clear with the people at the right level, it's meaningful, it's impactful, and it's tangible right then and there to say that here's all the things we could have put in place. And it builds better partnership. And it's not about calling anybody out, because it's everybody could have done a better job, but it's more about really pinpointing to say, and we all talk about it, right? That spending time when an incident happens way more expensive than having to have built it from the beginning. So I think that's a really important one. And we spend more time reacting to incidents as an industry than we do spend time on learning from them, I think.
Yeah, security teams don't really get a chance to practice incidents other than when they happen a lot of the times. Or when they do, it's so stressful that they can't really learn anything from it, which is a hard problem to solve, because from a business point of view, why are they practicing a thing we don't want to happen? And that's a tough understanding. Your phrasing terrified me with saying someone did something wrong, and it's more, if we had had these opportunities, we could have done these things, rather than someone did something wrong somewhere in the process. Because yeah, humans don't love being told they did something wrong.
Yeah, and it's not about somebody doing something wrong. In fact, it's the opposite of that. It's what happened that was wrong, right? And sometimes it doesn't have to do with people, it has to do with
Yeah,
something else. And so it's like, what happened? Let's pinpoint the issue. And a lot of times what you see is it's like a process breakdown, or we didn't look at security, or we didn't even think that would become a privacy issue. And then, so it's, we're the right people in the room. How do we solve for that? But that's the part, that analysis piece many times doesn't happen. And it's not about pointing out or calling people out. It's the opposite of that. It's, hey, let's really understand so we can be better at this in the future, and not spend time doing that, but it would allow us to spend more time on features and new products.
How much do you feel like you differ from your peers in this approach? Do you think the industry is moving this way? Do you think we're now seeing kind of like a stratification between kind of this modern way of doing things and then kind of the old school way, Department of No? Do you think those people will eventually join the fold? Like, what's your sense on the overall industry and where it is?
We don't have enough people in the security space, and I think that's the biggest challenge, right? So you have like, I've been fortunate that I've been able to work at companies where I really got to sit with, I had different reporting structures. I've gone to different industries. I've understood the business. I've been able to go into financials. I've been able to engage with customers. Not every security person has. And, I was just talking to a peer of mine, and she's talking about how she's leading security for an organization that's really traditional. Getting buy-in on a project took her 2 years, right? And so, and I haven't worked, at companies like that. We're able to make decisions pretty quickly. And so it really varies. And, then the type of security folks, there's no standard really on what kind of security leadership you might have. And some companies, no might be the only way, right? And they're not able, and so I think yes, I do see a trend of security practitioners used to be like or security leaders used to be architects and more technology focused. There's been a shift to more risk focused, more business savvy. And it's kind of like merged to be like, you have to have tech experience, but you also have to be pretty business savvy. And if you have to choose one over the other, depending on where a company is at in their growth, I think they're going to lean more on the business strategy side, because that's where you'll see more impact versus heavy on the tech side, which you can have really strong tech people under the CISO to solve for.
Yeah, no, this context has been fantastic, and delving more into like all the different facets of how modern security looks. So before we wrap up, I wanted to give you the opportunity, if you have, your one sentence or one paragraph of pithy wisdom for, when people are like, yeah, after this, they're like, yeah, modern security, got it. I want to be successful in it. Like, what are you going to say to them?
It's a good one. I think I think modern security is all about understanding the business, prioritizing the security risks that have been around for a long time that are not modern, but really making them consumable to the business. And I think that's what modern security is all about, that security now becomes a business goal.
This is fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us, Rinki. And for everyone in the audience, reminder that you can submit your questions in the Q&A box below our videos, and we will be taking all those questions shortly.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.